Professor Borick, if I just read quickly a little bit of his bio that we put in the invitation, nationally recognized public opinion researcher and political scientist. He has conducted more than 400 large-scale public opinion surveys. They've been cited in major national news media and local news media. He's provided political analysis for National Public Radio, for PBS, MSNBC, and others, also cited by CNN and Fox News and C-SPAN. In his career, he has conducted surveys for a variety of government agencies too, and organizations, including the CDC and PBS, and the U.S. Department of Labor. He is also director of national surveys on energy and environment, and currently conducts surveys for the Morning Call newspaper in Allentown. And I think that's the summary. You can find a lot of his other background. You just Google him; he pops up all over the place. Professor Borick, glad to have you. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Tom, for the warm introduction and invitation to join everybody. And thank you for folks on a beautiful fall Friday for coming to listen to a political scientist when I'm sure you could be out enjoying a nice October day. So much appreciated for your time, and great to have this opportunity to come and speak to you. And you know, I'm a political scientist and a pollster, and we are in the heart of election season, as you all very, very well know. And so in Pennsylvania, as we'll talk about today, is in many ways at the epicenter of that. So with that, I am going to bring up some slides because, you know, as a pollster, I'm full of numbers, and it's easier to show than to say often. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Everybody see that? The screen pop up? Good. Tom, does it look good on your end?
Looks good for me.
Okay, that's good. Just wanted to make sure that I have it. So yes, indeed, midterm elections, 2022 Pennsylvania perspective. So, and as Tom said, I'm going to try to do this all in about 25, 30 minutes, so we could have lots of time in the hour for questions and discussion about what's going on here right now. So I think it's fair to argue. I'm probably a little biased, being in that I'm a Pennsylvanian, and I've been former, not for a long time, but former Philadelphia resident, a few years in West Philly. So good to always talk to a Philly audience. I think we are in Pennsylvania at the center of this electoral cycle. In so many ways, we are where attention both nationally and internationally is. And it's for a number of reasons. First, as you all know, we are a premier swing state in American politics, one of the biggest states, one of the most, among the biggest states, the most purple in its political coloring, if you will. And so there's a lot focused on here generally, but this year, other conditions have made that even more potent. We are electing both a governor and a senator, and this year, neither of them have incumbents in the race. And one thing about American politics, when there's no incumbent around, races tend to get more competitive generally. So we have those conditions. And of course, those races have lots of salience because they're going to dictate a whole bunch of things about policy, what's going to happen in Pennsylvania, maybe control of the U.S. Senate at the end of the day, where it's so tightly contested. So our reach is big. And down ballot, I wish I had more time to go all the way down to state house and state Senate races, but just in our congressional districts, we have 17 newly created. We lost a seat, so there are newly created districts. A number of these seats are highly competitive, and so we have an impact on what happens with the House elections this year. So it's all happening in Pennsylvania as we speak. So what I want to do is provide a little bit of an overview of the key statewide and congressional races, where they are. And I'm a political scientist, so I always think structurally, cyclically about what happens and how that affects the specifics of the races that you're familiar with. Races don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in broader contextual ways. And so I always try to call attention to those contextual aspects. So let's start. It is a midterm cycle. As probably a lot of folks in this audience know, historically, these cycles aren't good for the president's party. candidates that are in the president's party have an uphill battle to begin with. They're fighting, use all the metaphors. They're going into a headwind in a midterm cycle, and the opposition party rides those currents moving forward. And it's compounded, we see historically, when the president's numbers aren't very good. So even when presidents are in pretty good standing, their parties take a hit in these cycles. And when they're in less favorable conditions, they tend to feel those impacts even more. And I would argue that those two things are present. We know it's a cycle where Democrats control the presidency and Congress right now. And President Biden's numbers are fairly poor by historical standards. So let's dive in a little bit to the data, folks, to see where this takes us. This graph is looking back all the way to 1946 and Harry Truman's midterm election through 2018 and Donald Trump's midterm election. And you could see that everything south of the dark line means the president's party loses seats. And anything above means the president's party gain seats. And it doesn't take you a long time to see there's not a lot on the plus side. It's usually a loss of seats, sometimes many seats. You can see over here on the y-axis, minus 20, minus 40, minus 60. This is House seats that you could see. So presidents often take quite a hit. The only two exceptions there are 98 and 2002, kind of weird outlier years. The impeachment in 1998, Clinton was being impeached by Congress at the time, and many people in the country thought it was a bridge too far. Clinton's approval ratings were really high. It was pretty good times, if you will, in the U.S., and Republicans were punished, and Clinton was rewarded with some seats. And then, of course, post 9/11, George W. Bush in 2002, kind of in the rallying effect, saw that. But every other election, the president's party loses seats, and I fully expect that's what's going to happen in this cycle, unless something changes, and we'll talk about that. Just to be clear, I mentioned that President Biden's numbers aren't very stellar. This is his job approval rating that I just took, I think, yesterday or the day before, from the site 538 for political junkies. You probably pop in there. It's a great kind of analytical platform to look at things like polling. And this is the trend lines for President Biden, and you can see his numbers are right around that 42% mark. He's seen a little bit of an increase, as you can see here, since the summer, but it's kind of leveled off right there. And so he'll probably be somewhere around there heading into election day. That's not usually good news, as you can see by this next chart. And this is probably the geekiest political science chart I'm going to throw, so bear with me. This is on the x-axis down here, the horizontal axis. This is the president's approval rating before the midterm, and this is the number of seats they either lose or gain, kind of what we were just showing, and they're layered together. And you could see when the president's numbers are in the 40s, low 40s, which is concentrated down here, or as you'll see down here, a lot of the losses are in that range that are pretty substantial, 50, 60, 60 seats. 2010 was President Obama's midterm, where he lost over 60 seats. But almost always we're in the loss. So when presidents have negative approval ratings, their parties lose, and sometimes lose significantly. Now, there's some mitigating circumstances that I think make it less likely he'll see the kind of losses Obama did. But I think the impact, again, looks there. What's notable, by the way, is even when presidents have pretty good approval ratings, their party loses seats. Usually not that much, as you can see, 10 to 20 seats. But that's part of the cycle, the cyclical nature. Americans revert away from the president's party the first chance they get after a midterm. And that's pretty powerful. There's some other indicators here that tell us about the likelihood of losses, and that's polling that we do. As a pollster, we look at this, and there's this thing called the generic ballot, where pollsters like me ask voters, hey, in the upcoming election, we don't mention the candidate's name, but are you going to vote Democrat or Republican for the House? And we ask this all the time, and you could see this against taken from 538, that the red line is Republicans, the blue line is Democrats. And we've seen a little bit of ebbs and flows. It doesn't look gigantic, but 4 or 5 points is really big in terms of national impact. Where for most of the year, since January, the Republicans controlled or had a majority of, or at least a plurality of the generic ballot vote. But that switched this summer in the wake of the Dobbs decision, which we'll revisit in a little while. And what happened is Democrats actually started to lead in generic ballots. But in the last week or so, it seems to have evened off. Republicans making some gains right there, to the point where it seems the kind of national averages. This is October 19th. The 538 average had it as a dead heat, right? 45% for each. And it seems like the trend lines might be heading a little bit in the Republicans' way, which would be the historical pattern heading towards election day. Just to show you, you might say, well, what good is that? Does it really show us anything? This is performance, the generic ballot performance. So this is the polling average where you see it. This is where it was right before election day. Like in 2020, the Democrats had a 7-point, 2018, 8-point, 2016, they were up 1. And here's what actually happened. And you could see there is a little bit of deviation, right? There are years like 2018, the midterms, where the generic ballot was spot on with the actual results. Democrats won by 8.6% in all the ballots cast in the House elections. And other years it could be off. For like 2020, actually, Republicans outperformed where the polls said, and the Democrats won in 2020 in the national ballot, if you will, all votes cast, but not by the margin. So there is some room for error there that you could see. But generally, I'm a pretty firm believer that the generic ballot gives us a general sense of where we're headed. So it'll be fun to see how that performs the last few weeks. Yeah. Also, well, that's the House, right? And the House is particularly sensitive to midterm elections. It tends to have these big swings because the House is designed that way. 435 people being reelected every 2 years. It can go more. The Senate and governorships aren't the same. They're statewide offices. There's not as many of them up, so they don't have the same, overall swings. But you could still see in this chart dating back to 46 that almost always the president's party loses more governors seats, which are the green bars, and Senate seats, which are the yellow bars. There's more exceptions than there were with the House, but the trend is generally the same, because overall these are harder environments for the president's party, and we've seen in most years that's the case that we see. So the question I might frame to you, and you might frame to me, is there something unique about 2022 that makes it a cycle buster, right? Is there something like we mentioned the Clinton impeachment or the 9/11 aftermath and kind of shaking up this dynamic? Is there anything that could happen in this year like that? And I'm not sure, and I don't think there's something quite in those ballparks. But the two factors that seem to be potential are the presence of a former president in the spotlight, diminishing the traditional referendum dynamic that goes on. So if it's a referendum on Biden right now, that's pretty good for Republicans. But you have a former president, and former President Trump, that's very central in American politics right now. We just don't have that as an example that I can easily cite, maybe back to Teddy Roosevelt, probably the last time that's really kind of happened. And so is that an intervening factor that can make it this year different? Perhaps. And the other one, of course, is the overturn of Roe v. Wade. I absolutely think it has changed the dynamic and added energy to Democrats that wasn't there pre Dobbs decision. So I do think that it has helped Democrats' chances, and it could certainly mitigate the type of wave election that we might have otherwise seen that's more traditional. Is it enough to really kind of flip the script, if you will? I don't know, but it's worthy of, at least we can happily talk about that later. Just to give you a sense about abortion's kind of play in Pennsylvania. This is from one of our statewide polls last month. The issue breaks Democratic way. A majority of Pennsylvanians support abortion being legal in all or most cases. So as you can see here, about 2 and 3 Pennsylvania likely voters, and this is just likely voters, which makes it more impactful, say that they think it should be legal in most cases. And if you have opposition, in this case to that, and the issue is salient, it's important, it's certainly an advantage Democrats. And I think it is. I think it's something that you could see it in their ads, you could see it in their focus. How far it carries them, that's, we're going to see, but it's certainly been a bonus in a year that's challenging for them. So you could see in Pennsylvania, think let's more specifically about the House, since we're looking at and what might happen. There's currently 18 seats, perfectly evenly divided, our purplish state, right? But we lost a seat in the reallocation post-census, 2020 census. We're down to 17. So we've had to create new districts. And by the way, you could do the math, right? Pennsylvania actually grew. We're about 13 million people from last time, but we have one fewer seat, which means districts got bigger population wise. So, and that's had some marginal effects that I'll show you some examples of. And I think on the map as a whole, and these are the interesting things, Republicans were not very pleased with the process by which we got the map, court intervention and where we ended up. But I think, and most people that do kind of empirical evaluations of the map, is that the map's pretty good for Republicans, especially when you layer it in a really good cycle, right? Or in a cycle that's good for Republicans. And there are some flip opportunities of the seats in the state that I'll point out. The 7th, the 8th, and the 17th districts, all held by Democrats right now. Connor Lamb out west in the 17th, Matt Cartwright in the 8th, and Susan Wild in the 7th, are all districts that are very competitive and held by Democrats, and potential pickups for Republicans. I'll just give you a quick example of this for folks that might know the map. So here's Pennsylvania congressional maps. You got the 2nd and the 3rd, the Philadelphia districts, right? In the city, you got the suburban Philadelphia districts. But here's the districts we're looking at. The 7th is the Lehigh Valley right now, which is Lehigh and Northampton County, and a sliver of Monroe County, which I'll note. The 8th is northeastern Pennsylvania, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, and the Poconos. And the 17th is Allegheny County, kind of suburban Philadelphia, suburban Pittsburgh area. And you'll see, those are the districts. And what's interesting, let's just point out one. This is the old map when we had 18. Here's the new map. And, I'm not going to ask you to try it on the fly. I think, does it look alike? And you'll see, yeah, in a lot of ways, it does look alike. The districts are still there. 2nd and 3rd in Philadelphia are still basically the same districts that we have. The 7th, if you remember, I'll drop back for a second. Let's see if I can do that. Oh, no. Yeah, this is the 7th. You can see there's a little strip here, and the 7th was this part of Monroe County. It was pretty Democratic, Stroudsburg area, which is the old 7th. The new 7th, if I can do this, now gets rid of that area down here, and it adds in Carbon County. And I don't know how much folks know about Carbon County. It's kind of a rural county. It's a very Republican-leaning county right now. President Trump won there overwhelmingly. So you take out a little slice of Democratic area, add in a Republican area, you layer in a tougher cycle, and Susan Wild, the incumbent Democrat, is in jeopardy. We just released a poll this week on this race, and it's a dead heat, which didn't surprise me. Sometimes you get poll results and you say, yeah, that's what I expected. And this is what I expected. It's a very balanced district. It's a good year for Republicans. And this is the type of district that you can see a flip in. The 8th and the 17th are same. It's 8th's a pretty competitive district, leaning Republican. Trump won the district, but Matt Cartwright is an incumbent. He probably will win there, but it'll be close. And the 17th is an open seat. Connor Lamb left it, and an open seat in a competitive district in a bad cycle is there. So those Pennsylvania districts are key. I'm happy to talk more detail about those. This was, by the way, I told you the Wild poll we released. This was just last month. We asked Pennsylvanians who they're going to vote for in their House elections, and you can see the same scenario, right? Kind of even divide in the state, which is very Pennsylvanian, if you will, right now in our purplish view. So let's kind of move on to the governors in the Senate race. get some perspective before I turn to you and open it up. The governor's race, we know Governor Wolf's finishing his second term and the seat's open in this election, which makes it fascinating. And we've had this history all the way back to the 70s when we started the PA Constitution allowed governors to run for re-election of alternating party control. There's good trivia. The last time the same party won back to back was in the 60s with Governor Schaefer and Scranton, both Republicans winning. Ever since then, we have never had one party follow, someone from the same party follow. And usually it alternates 8 years, right? Schaap to Thornburg to Bob Casey Sr. to Ridge to Rendell to Corbett to Wolf, right? We have that. The only exception is Governor Corbett only served 4 years, didn't get a second term, didn't win a second term. But that's a little bit in our DNA, right? We alternate power in Pennsylvania. That's an advantage Republicans. We like to do this. We like to flip power. It's a good cycle for Republicans. Kind of everything aligns right there for the Republican Party. As I know in this slide, however, big, gigantic, however, in this cycle, candidates still have a big role. And when the Democrats selected Attorney General, sorry about the misspelling, Josh Shapiro, they put up what I would argue as an analyst, their A team. If you said before the election, hey, in a tough cycle, what Democrat would I want to put up in Pennsylvania for a governor's race? I wouldn't blink. I'd say Josh Shapiro. He's won statewide. He won in a year in 2020 when other Democrats were losing statewide offices for treasurer and auditor general. He's well funded. He is a very managed candidate. He stays on message. He's a pro, if you will. And in a tough year, I think, boy, you need your best. And it's hard for me to see the Democrats coming up with someone that would have been better. He had a cleared field. He didn't have to spend any money in the primary. Almost everything you could want in place is there. Now, that doesn't guarantee you anything, especially in a tough cycle, but it advantages your opportunities. Republicans, on the other hand, selected Senator Doug Mastriano, as you all know, in their primary in a contested, fragmented primary. He won with 40%, which was pretty impressive in that fragmented primary. But I believe it opened the door for Democrats to maintain control, break a trend, fight the cycle, and actually win in the race. And you could see this is from 538. I just took it today. The picture. This is the polling in this race all the way through, through the summer. And as the race has gone on, and especially when polls started to pop, you could see that Shapiro has maintained a double-digit lead in the race. And even so, even if I think there is a systematic error, maybe where pollsters are overstating one party, it's not the type of difference you would see on the aggregate that would be a race by a few points. Shapiro's at an advantage in this race. He's well funded. Mastriano's numbers, as you could see, have traditionally been around 40%. He's having trouble cracking that. Shapiro regularly cracks 50%, which is key. I think major advantage in this race. Shapiro is well funded. He's going to be on the airs. He's done a great job of categorizing Mastriano as extreme. Mastriano can't get on the airwaves. He doesn't have any money. And his campaigning strategy is baffling to me about how he's reaching out to audiences. If without money, you think maybe some retail politics, but he doesn't even seem to want to do that. So I think it's a major advantage Democrats. The Senate race is much more maybe interesting in some ways, competitive. Pat Toomey is stepping down. He's not seeking re-election. So it's also an open seat. We haven't had that in a long time, 2 open seats. And with the 50-50 in the Senate, our seat could be impactful. And in fact, Democrats have looked at Pennsylvania as probably their best pickup opportunity. And Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz, as he calls himself, and I guess earned, by being a doctor, and Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, won their nominations. Mehmet Oz by 1,000 votes in the Republican primary, due to, in no small part, President Trump's endorsement to vouch for him, are really interesting brands. I'm fascinated. I've probably done 100 media interviews on these individuals because they are fascinating, right? You have a Hollywood celebrity doctor who comes to fame with Oprah and his own show, against, by the way, a non-Pennsylvanian Republican nominee who spent most of his life outside the state, against this kind of unique figure in American politics, John Fetterman, whose brand is unique. His image, as you know, is not standard. He wears hoodies, Carhartt hoodies and shorts. He's tattooed. He's 6'8". And he takes on issues that might not always fit the mold, right? How that we think in a contemporary Democrat would be. So we have these competing brands. The cycle benefits Republicans. I keep coming back to that because it's so important. And if you can get them rallying Republicans to rally around Oz after the primary, they have a chance in this seat. And I think you see that in the polling, that Republicans are, unlike necessarily fully around Mastriano, they are around Oz. While Fetterman's brand, can open some doors for Democrats in the state. His appeal to white collar or white working class voters in the state, and he's not going to win that group back to the Democrats, but could he cut in to some of the margins that Republicans have built up there? I think he has potential, and he certainly has done a great job of making Oz's tangential connections to the state a central issue, right? That he's trolled them. That this is a Hollywood. It's basically a hybrid New Jersey Hollywood figure trying to win a Pennsylvania seat, and that's hurt Oz in a significant way. His favorabilities aren't there, but so is Oz. Oz has been. People have asked me about this race, changing dynamics. Oz's efforts and outside groups to paint Fetterman as weak on crime, soft on crime, too progressive, especially in the Philadelphia media market that's hitting the burbs, has been impactful in tightening this race. And as you'll see, this is the 538 estimates right now. They have the race, about a 4-point race. Some of the most recent polls you could see have it as a dead heat. So the margins, you could follow it, right? The blue dots, Fetterman, kind of going in that direction. The red dots, Oz. The trend lines favor Oz, and so it's a really close race. It's a really close race, and on little things on the margin could be impactful. So, wanted to wrap up and make sure we had time for discussion. We are in the spotlight. You could see that from how people are focusing on Pennsylvania, the amount of money and ads. And Republicans are riding a good cycle, and I think it's working in their favor. And at the end, is probably going to be a national picture time. Democrats can capitalize on candidate matchups. They're certainly doing it in the gubernatorial election. We'll see if they can, where it's going to come out in the Senate race. And as they say on TV, stay tuned. So there you go. And I open it, Tom. I'll turn it back to you for any questions that people.
All right, great. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? I suddenly heard a little garble on the line. Is everyone hearing okay? I hope so.
Yep, it was fine.
So that's great. I'm gonna just remind you again, please put your questions in the chat there. I see one, and I will get through them. But as the moderator here, I'm going to take advantage of my position, my incumbency, and I'm going to start with my question. I'll get to you all, but please use the chat or raise your hand. I'm very curious about the Philadelphia area and the Philadelphia suburbs. The Inquirer about a month ago ran a piece where they looked at registrations statewide and including certain areas, and they found using state data that registrations had narrowed quite a bit between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats had a registration edge and still do, but that's been narrowing quite a bit apparently. And I'm curious how that affects all of this, and particularly how the Philadelphia sort of metro area, which is apparently a big driver of results anyway, how that figures into this.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, Tom, and you're accurate. So, since in this century, Democrats have had an advantage in registration in Pennsylvania, number of registered voters, but it's vacillated, right? Actually, it's kind of interesting when back in 2000, Democrats had about a 500,000 vote advantage in the state. It ballooned to almost a million at some points, as you get to the Obama years. And then over recent years, including what you just cited in most recent times, Republicans have cut into that advantages. This is through a number of factors: Democrats becoming Republican, changing their party status, changes in who's coming in to the system, who's leaving the system. But the bottom line is Republicans have closed that gap to about 500,000 votes right now, which is impactful, right? It's not determinative because people still vote based on and candidates and other things, but it's a sea change. It's really helped, and some of those pickups are on the margin in places that are Democratic. So of course, Philadelphia, as everybody in this audience knows, is deeply Democratic. But if there are some marginal changes, right, even in a place like that make it even slightly less Democratic, it have impacts, right? Because Philadelphia of the Democratic success statewide, the advantages that Democrats could get in the city often dictate their ultimate success statewide, and so those differences could be there. There's, as so often the reality data, there are some factors that complicate the situation, and the most recent, and there's the complication. That trend has been going Republican. The post-Dobbs decision trend in people coming in post-Dobbs this summer has been an advantage for Democrats statewide and regionally, where you've had younger voters and voters that have decided to register over the summer, overwhelmingly choosing to be Democrats instead of Republicans. So they're this kind of latest wave, and this isn't a gigantic group compared to the overall electorate, so it's all on the margin. But that group is much more likely to be choose to be Democrat than Republican. By the way, the best data that we can see on this says they're also much more likely to be a woman rather than a man. Women are registering at rates higher than men, and it's probably no coincidence that this is post-Dobbs decision. And so those kind of countervailing trends are part of the puzzle, if you will. But you're right, Tom, the kind of these broad in the area. And what's even more interesting, is it's on the aggregate. For example, in the year 2000, you'd say, oh, it looks a lot like it does overall in Pennsylvania, about 500,000 more Democrats. Where they're placed is totally different, right? It used to be Southwest Pennsylvania was overwhelmingly Democrat, suburban Philadelphia, Republican. As you know, that's kind of flipped, right? So Southwest Pennsylvania outside of Pittsburgh has gone very red, and suburban Philadelphia over this time frame has become increasingly blue.
All right, great. Thank you. That's interesting. I'm going to go to Linda. Linda writes, how much do you think Fetterman's health issues have impacted his popularity, for one? And I'm just going to add, how much does it matter to people when they're actually going to vote? How much are they paying attention to that? Do you have actual polling on that?
Yeah, and it's there is some, and it's hard to poll. It's such a interesting issue, right? And of course, it's a personal health issue for a candidate, and that's obviously in everybody's interest, when somebody is ill to hope for the best there. But the reality is, it also is we've woven into a political cycle, right? So how do we talk about it? How do we think about it? It's tricky. And we're seeing and how for most Pennsylvanians, it's not going to impact their vote. Other factors, and they're voting Democrat. His health situation is not pivotal in the decision. There are on the margin. Oh, got it. Very good. Split tickets, right, could be in close races really impactful. And I think the absence of straight ticket balloting, which was removed at the same time as we brought in mail balloting and the reforms in Act 77 in the fall of 2019, could matter, right? We could see this, and we see split tickets playing out in Pennsylvania in like 2020. How do you get to state offices won by Republicans and Biden winning and Shapiro winning? You have only one way: split tickets, or people that would not vote down ballot. But it is split tickets, and so I'm fascinated with the potential for a cohort of, for example, Oz Shapiro voters, maybe in places like suburban Philadelphia that aren't anywhere near close to majority or even double digits, but 5%, 6%, 7%, that could tip an election. And so I think that is advantaged by the absence of straight ticket voting. And also there's, I think, some voter preferences that might align with the possibility of doing that. So great question.
All right, great. Andy asked actually the same question about split tickets. Robert asks, I'm just going to read the whole question. Do you see in polling any signs of significant numbers of long-term Republicans who are dissatisfied with Republican leadership, adherence to Trump and Trumpian lies, and they're concerned about basic commitment to truth? It's a question about what's happening in the Republican rank and file and Republican leadership.
Oh, it's a good question, and there is a cohort within the Republican rank and file that has concerns with the issues noted in the question, the former president's role, the adherence to lies and misinformation about things like elections, that has concerned some. And a lot over the last 5 years since Trump arrived, some folks have left the party for that very reason in Pennsylvania. And some of those are, by the way, campaigning for Josh Shapiro right now. And you have some Republicans, that are still say they are Republicans in that position. That said, if you look at most people that identify as Republican, that still continue to identify as Republican or are registered as Republican, and you ask them their views on the former president, a lot of his claims, you have pretty widespread acceptance and support for those positions. We've polled this a lot over the last few years, things about election claims and others related to the former president's messaging. And there's some significant buy-in within broader Republican ranks. So in fact, you would say the minority are the ones that outright dislike the former president and a lot of his messages. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that he's a guarantee to be, the party nominee in 2024, or that when paired against other Republicans may start to fare poorly. I think there is polling evidence nationally that shows some wear and tear on him in Republican ranks and the electorate in general. But his presence is still pretty significant within broader Republican ranks.
But will that have an impact on this particular election in Pennsylvania, with those dissatisfied Republicans voting for the Democratic candidates on the top?
Yeah, Pedro, I think where you see this is on the extreme. Yeah, I'm going to say the extreme, and in the governor's race, right, where you have a full-blown, I will describe Senator Mastriano as a Trump acolyte. He is every bit in the MAGA movement and in the style and positions of former President Trump, and he has lost a segment of the Republican electorate. Not a gigantic one, but in Pennsylvania, you do the math. Tom's question before, I think, about registration, there's still a lot more Democrats. And even though Republicans turn out better, you cannot lose a segment of your electorate and make the math work in Pennsylvania. And that group of Republicans that has, gone against Mastriano, they're not going against Oz, they're going against Mastriano. And so on the margin, I think that group is going to be impactful and help explain why I think Josh Shapiro is going to win this race in all likelihood. And so it matters, right? And you can come home. Some Republicans that really aren't enamored with the Trump movement in the party might be able to come home to Dr. Oz that can't come home to Senator Mastriano. So really great question.
Well, we're at time here, but I want to squeeze in one more question. This was from Jim Moss, just because we got cut off. And he's asking about the debates next week and impact of debates. Now, you could talk generally about impact of debates and what the roles at this stage. But as you're to your point earlier, these are unique candidates. So is there any different spin on them as far as the debates go, impact of debates with these particular candidates?
Yeah, it's another great question. All questions have been really good, as I'd expect. The debates. So if you ask me in most cycles when I'm talking, with reporters, and they say, "Hey, do debates matter?" I say not all that much. Not presidential debates might be a little bit different because they get audiences, but statewide debates, governor, senator, really don't draw a lot of audiences. If you look at who's watching them, and who is watching is often the most loyal supporters that are tuning in to see the debate. And so they're already set, right? And so it might, there's just not a lot of big movable audiences for these. The Fetterman-Oz debate, I think, is going to probably be pretty watched and get some attention. I know it's going to get secondary attention, news coverage, and all the other things, what goes on, given the circumstances of who they are, the nature of the race, and the lieutenant governor's health situation, which people are very anxious to see how he performs in this setting, a live setting that they're seeing him in. And I think you'll get, a lot of folks doing. Now, how many of them could be impacted? Probably not a ton, but we keep coming back to the nature of that race. It's close, right? And so if there's concerns for that sliver of voters about lieutenant governor's capabilities to step into this position, it could have an effect. If I'm the lieutenant governor's in his campaign and he's using support technology, right? He's going to have a monitor and things to look at. I'm incredibly forthcoming about that. I think it's the best strategy that he could have. Look, I'm dealing with a very difficult health situation. I'm recovering like so many Pennsylvanians are. And I need some support right now. And that's why I have a monitor. And that's why I might be delayed in how I speak today a little bit. And this is all part of recovery that people do. And I'm lucky, right? I would say if I'm John Fetterman, I think I've seen the messages, I'm lucky that I have the support to do this and to make it as explicit as possible. And that, that really kind of sets the bar in that way. So, but it's this debate, unlike other debates, I think could be very impactful.
Tom, can I make a comment here about the debate? I watched the Fetterman, Connor Lamb, and Malcolm Kenyatta debate, and Fetterman is no debater. He really isn't. He did not show very well. So now he's got the added problem. So it's going to be interesting, but I think Oz will look better.
Yeah, Linda's point. I mean, I don't think it's a natural setting for the lieutenant governor. We had a debate last spring up at Muhlenberg, and he never showed up. He kind of strung us along a little bit. I mean, and I understand it strategically. He's not the first to do that. I've moderated lots and lots of debates, so it's not. But strategically, he was up in the polls, and he didn't want to expose himself, right, until later in the election when votes are cast and all. Because I think it's not his strength, and when you're up in the polls, you usually don't give opportunity. So, I think these are concerns for the campaign. Great point.
All right. Any other questions, thoughts, dreams, and desires? All right, Professor Borick, thank you very much. This was really interesting and very helpful. And thanks for slogging through the technical problems. and it gave us a chance to have a little mini mini committee meeting there.
That's good. I'm glad I could set that up for you to have some personal time to enjoy. Thank you. Sorry about the technology, and thank you for having me join you. Enjoy the nice sunny Friday.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Keep an eye out for the next email from us. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.